So, hi everyone. Hope you can hear us. Let's get started. Super excited about this meetup. Uh, and also we are coming with our conference next month. So, we are busy with that preparations as well. And we are kind of managing both the meetups and conferences now. Looking forward to the this meetup and the conference as well. Today we have like three talks, and our first speaker is Gaurav, and he will be talking about accessibility, in particular about the nested elements accessibility. Without any further delay, we'll get started and invite Gaurav to the stage. Hi, Gaurav.
Hey, hi Kiran. Hi everyone.
Yeah,
Uh, yeah, can everyone see my screen?
yes,
Cool.
we'll get started.
Sure. Cool. I think I'll give a quick overview about the talk and about myself. So, I have been working with smallcase for about 2.5 years now, and even before that, I've been working with accessibility for about 5 years. I am particularly interested in web accessibility, but like now I've started looking into mobile accessibility as well. Uh, I am a lead software engineer, and I uh, like mostly have expertise with front end. Right now, at this point in time, I'm interested in accessibility and system design and design systems in general, multi-tenancy on front end. So yeah, I mean mostly that is it about me and an introduction about this talk in particular. So this is going to be about a particular problem with accessibility where we tend to create designs or tend to create components which have nested interactions, and that is not good for assistive technologies like screen reader or sometimes even the keyboard and mouse users as well. So we'll discuss those problems, and then we'll discuss some of the patterns that can help solve those problems. This talk is not particularly about React, but the patterns that we talk about, they can obviously be implemented in React. Most of these things are in context of a component uh, based design, or like what something like what React provides, or Vue, or even Angular. So like when you think of uh, development in terms of component, you will face these kind of problems, and that is where I think uh, I'll try to solve some of the problems that we'll get into by default. Cool. Quickly getting started with the talk. The first thing is, what do we mean by nested interactive elements? So like you already know what are interactive elements, things like button or link or anything which allows user interaction, checkboxes, different input types, and everything, right? So all of these elements are interactive elements, and this talk or this particular problem is related to when we nest interactive elements, which means that whenever we have a link inside a link in markup, or whenever we have a button inside a link, or when we have a checkbox inside a button, or when we have a link inside a checkbox. So we'll see why that is incorrect, why that is invalid HTML, why that is an incorrect accessibility pattern, and we'll see what problems it poses and what kind of solutions we can have. None of those solutions are actually trivial. So like, which is why if you have any particular questions during the talk, you can ask me, and we'll see if we can answer them right there or towards the end of the talk. Cool. So about nested interactions or nested interactive elements, there are obviously some HTML spec, or there are ARIA specs which mention why you should not have nested interactive elements. I've just added some detail about it here. Nothing that we need to particularly go into, but in general, it is invalid HTML if you have nested interactive elements. If you run it through an HTML validator, it will give you an error that you have a button inside a button, or you have an anchor inside a button. uh, to like work around this, some people tend to just create divs with an on click, which again like is an accessibility problem, because then the div only has an on click and it does not have the keyboard accessibility or the screen reader accessibility that you might require, which again violates something called WCAG 4.1.2, the rule which says that interactive elements for mouse users should also be accessible to screen reader users if they are supposed to provide the same functionality to screen reader. Similarly, there is a spec for ARIA and HTML which exactly specifies what roles can be nested, which elements can be nested, and in what way. So, like, worth going through if you are actually getting into some problem related to nested interactive elements. Then any kind of accessibility tooling, if you use anything for manual testing or for automated testing, it will also again tell you that this is a problem. So I've just listed down two or three popular tools and how they report these errors and what kind of suggestions they make. Cool, we'll jump into examples very quickly. So if you have been writing HTML for a while, and if you get into a situation where you are writing an anchor inside an anchor, then by default, uh, like reflexively, you will say that it feels wrong for some reason, because like this is not something that you do typically. There might be some use case for which you are doing it now, but by default you'll think that okay, this is not all right, right, even without a validator telling you. But in some cases it's actually difficult for you to say by intuition whether something is right or wrong. So for example, button inside button might feel incorrect for some people who have like a habit of working with HTML validators, or who already have some context about accessibility. But then for newer developers, it might not mean anything. Like they might be nesting button inside button, especially with component based frameworks where you do not know what the parent component markup looks like, right? So then the third one is definitely problematic and very specific, even for people who have been working with markup for a while. Once you use like role equal to button inside another role equal to button, this wouldn't by default feel incorrect to you, because you know that okay, anchor inside anchor looks incorrect because you've been working with anchor element for a long time. Button inside button might look incorrect because you've been working with button elements for a long time. But as you do div role equal to button and there is another div role equal to button inside it, like by default you wouldn't feel that it is something which is wrong, and especially because it does not lead to any visual problems. And the HTML validator would not complain as well in most cases, because like uh, the new validators might complain because they also understand the ARIA roles and everything. But generally HTML validators would not complain about it, because HTML validators would only complain about HTML elements and their default semantics. But all of the above are actually incorrect. We'll see some examples of why, and like why would it be confusing if we create something like this. So like in terms of problems that we get into with nested interactive elements, there are problems which are for like applicable to mouse users, and there are problems which are applicable to keyboard users, screen reader users, and even other assistive technologies that we do not use on a day-to-day basis. Then there's a problem of user expectations. Like even if you create an element which has some kind of nested interaction, since the user has not seen any such elements in the wild, and even in like any known applications that they use, they wouldn't really understand by default how to use a certain interaction, right? Then browser behaviors differ based on what kind of nesting you are doing. So we'll just quickly see some problems that might happen with this, right? But we'll not go in depth into every problem, because there are some examples which through which we'll try to understand these problems later, right? So like just giving you a quick example of where it could be a problem for mouse users, right? So let's say you have a checkbox, right? And the checkbox label has a link in it, right? If you have seen something like a terms and conditions model, where there is a checkbox saying I have read the terms and conditions, and the like terms and conditions itself is a link, right? So now if you know checkbox behavior, you would know that clicking on the label would actually select the checkbox. But in this case, the label has a link. So when you click on the link, should it actually take you to the link, or should it check the checkbox? Now, as a visual user, you probably have an intuition that actually it should just open the link and it should not check the checkbox. But clicking the rest of the label would probably check the checkbox, right? So as a visual user, you wouldn't really mind that okay, this is a behavior that the developer has built in. Although semantically this is incorrect, because the semantic behavior of checkbox is to uh, toggle the checkbox when the label is clicked, and in this case the label contains a link, and if link is clicked, then like what is the supposed behavior? Like should link open and checkbox should not get checked? Should link not open, only checkbox should get checked? Or should link open as well as checkbox should get checked, right? Our intuition says that okay, link should open, checkbox should not get checked, because that is how visually we are used to interacting with elements. But someone who is using a keyboard, someone who is using a screen reader, since the semantic shown to them is more like this is a checkbox label, like they would actually not be shown that there is a link or something, or otherwise they will just be shown that there is a link but there is no checkbox, because screen readers cannot uh, decipher this kind of nested interactive patterns, because that is not what they are built for, and that is something that is by default inappropriate to use in a assistive technology environment, right? So this is a problem which mouse users would definitely face. Going to keyboard users, let's say you have some nested interactive element, right? So in that case you have a div which, or like let's say you have a button which is clickable as a whole, then there is a lot of content inside the button and there is another button or link inside it, right? So now what should be the tab order? If you tab, then it should first tap to the parent button, then tap to the child, or like it should actually ignore the child and just move to the sibling element, because generally this is how tab works, that it tabs through siblings, right? It goes from one element to the next. It generally does not go inside an element for the next tab, because that is not what the default keyboard behavior states, right? In some cases browsers would try to make sure that there are like sensible defaults, which means that they would actually go inside the nested element, and then they would try to make sure that all the focusable elements inside the nested elements also get focused. But then this is a browser implementation, right? It might depend that some browser does not implement it in this way because this is not in spec, right? This is something which is not allowed by spec, so there is no reason for them to implement it in a standardized way, although like mostly they have sensible default, so not a major problem. But then in this case another problem that happens is, where do you put the like visual focus indication, right? Where do you put the focus indicator? Once you are on the outside element, you can put it on the outside element, but as you tap forward, should the focus still remain on the outside element or come to inside element? Again, a problem with how browsers support this in different ways, because there is no standard for this. Then like screen readers, I think I've already mentioned some of the issues. So for screen readers it is particularly problematic, because let's say you have a link inside a link. Now screen reader user focuses on the outside link. What should the like label read for them? Should it actually consider the label of the internal link as well, or should it not? Like, how do you define what should be announced to the screen reader in this case, right? When they focus on the outside link, should it announce the text of the inside link as well, or should it not? Like, we'll see examples, and you will get to understand why this is majorly problematic. Like, this is something that uh, can just not be solved using any of our easier patterns, where we can say that okay, it is a minor problem for the user, so we'll let go of it. But this is not a minor problem, because screen readers, they either will definitely ignore the internal element and would not announce whatever is in the internal element. Screen reader focus by default would not go to the internal element. So like it would be very difficult for a screen reader user, or for that matter any other assistive tech user, to actually know that there is a nested interactive element, and if there is, then what is the label of the internal element, what is the label of the external element, right? So this, just hearing this, it does not look like a major problem that cannot be solved, right? It actually can be solved, but then since it is not a trivial pattern, there are very complex patterns which you can have with nested interactions. So it is like it does not make sense for screen readers and even HTML spec to solve it right now, right? So we'll just quickly see some of these examples where we have nested interactions, and then we'll quickly see some of the solutions that we may have for them, and like why do these problems happen. Also, I'll just go to the next slide. We have already talked about these fading examples, so we'll not go through this once again. But let's just quickly get an understanding of why do we end up with nested interactive elements, right? So there are two parties involved in it. One is someone who designs the component. They have to make sure that the interaction patterns are appropriate, and then someone who actually creates the component in code, like implements the component, they have to make sure that the like interaction patterns are appropriate. So as devs, why do we like exactly need nested interactive elements, or like why do we end up with nested interactive elements? The major reason is like we have a component based framework, and since we cannot see the markup of the parent component, we don't really know whether the button that we are creating can end up in inside another button, or whether the parent element component has any other interactive elements inside which my component would be rendered, right? Because we are not used to seeing the final generated HTML in these cases. Whenever we are using a component based framework like React or Vue, we only look at the JSX that we have in code. What real, or like let's say we'll look at the React component tree in React debugger, but rarely would we see the generated HTML to figure out what the exact markup that is generated looks like. And if we don't do that, I mean we wouldn't generally do that, then we'll not be able to know in most cases that there is a nested interaction that has happened, right? Because I mean, uh, during coding there is no easy way for to you to actually just like every time you cannot go to all the parent elements and figure out where uh, your child is being rendered in, and like how to see whether there is a interactive element in parent also. And especially if the parent is coming from a third party library, obviously you'll not make that effort just because uh, like it requires a lot of time to do that. The second thing is, why do we end up creating these interactive elements in a nested way, is because we misinterpret designs. So if the designs are not clearly communicated, we might think of things as being positioned inside each other, but instead of like uh, understanding that the designer wanted to say that these buttons or these elements are supposed to be siblings, we might end up creating them on inside the other, right? So that is another problem. And the next problem with devs is like when we are using a third party library, obviously we cannot like even if we know that there is a problem, we cannot change anything because we are not going to change the third party library. So when that happens, we'll just like probably let it go that okay, if this has to work like this, then it has to work like this. So these are mostly the problems on the dev side that lead to nested interactive elements. There is no like particular need on the dev side for nested interactive elements. It's not like on dev we cannot get rid of this problem, but due to these two or three reasons, they generally end up with these nested elements. Then the other problem is on the design side, right? So if designers are not creating a design in a way that they can define interactions which are not nested, then as devs we would probably need to create those components in a nested way, right? So the problem with design is that the nested way of thinking is very common nowadays. Like it is not like something which can be simplified. So like once we see some examples, you'll be able to relate to it better. But in general, like designers would not want to be limited by this limitation from spec that you cannot have nested interactive elements. They would want you to create them in a way that they are spec compliant, they are accessible, but they are still like visually they look nested because that is how the UI demands it. Like this is arguable. Obviously, they can create some simpler interactions, but then uh, like they should also not be limited by this fact that the technology that they are using uh, limits the designs in a certain way, right? The designers, they should not think about designs in a way that it is going to be written in HTML, so it has to behave a certain way, or it has to be, if it is going to be written in a React Native or something, then it has to behave a certain way. They will create, they can, or they should be able to create designs which are independent of the technology that we are using, right? So that is one reason why designers, they sometimes need nested interactions, but also like they end up with nested interactions because they don't really uh, they aren't really bound to the technology that is going to create those components. Cool. We'll just quickly go through some examples where people have done it right. Right. So two of the products that I use on a regular basis, one is Twitter, one is Gmail. Both of them have a lot of nested interactions, at least UI wise. Like visually, if you see, you will see that okay, these elements are nested within each other. The markup can certainly be like in a different way, but they do it right. So like some of the examples from Twitter, if you see, the whole tweet is keyboard accessible, and then if you tab, it goes to the next interactive element, which is the name of the person. If you tab next, it goes to the next interactive element, which is the hashtag. If you tab, then it goes to the three dot menu. If you then tab, then it goes to the comment, then retweet, then like, and then share. So they have created it in a way which works fine for the keyboard user, and if you test it using a screen reader, it actually works fine for the screen reader user as well, right? So they have some good examples. On the right, if you can see, like there is another on even in your notifications, the whole notification is clickable, but then if there is any other link inside the notification, that also is interactive. Similarly, uh, the uh, there is a panel from Gmail, the third screenshot, which is code. So this again, the whole label is clickable, but then if you hover over the label, there is a three dot menu that appears, and this three dot menu is actually accessible by keyboard as well as screen readers as well, right? Although in the UI it is nested, right? So they definitely have some good patterns for this, which may or may not be spec compliant, because like everyone solves these problems in a different way, but at least it is not interactive in a nested way. Same for other examples from Twitter, right? So the one that you see, politics trending, in here, the whole card is tabbable, then the three dot menu is tabbable, then the hashtag is tabbable. So like all of these things are created in a very good way. Now coming to like how do we solve these issues. So as we saw that there are two major reasons of this happening. One is because of a dev mistake or oversight, like they did not uh, appropriately consider the designs and they ended up creating nested elements instead of sibling elements. Or like where they are using component based framework, how can we fix these problems. So one is if if you work with accessibility, probably you already have some kind of a HTML validator uh, built into one of your tooling. Like I have a HTML validator which is bookmarked. I mean, I don't think you can see that because it is in the browser toolbar. But I have a HTML validator which is bookmarked because like I generally work a lot with accessibility, so I tend to check on my HTML time and again. But then again, it is not a regular workflow for any dev. So generally, whenever there is a semantic HTML error, it also appears on the browser console. So whenever you are looking for JavaScript errors, if there is a semantic HTML error, it actually also appears. So you might have seen a lot of cases where you are using, let's say, a div inside a paragraph or something that like which is not allowed for some reason, then you will get these warnings on the browser console, which generally we ignore. But like if you, as a practice, if you look at it, there you would get to know that there are some nested interactions. Another way is to run some kind of automated accessibility check to get a report of such issues, because this is something which can be automatically figured out by tooling, unlike a lot of other accessibility things. So we can just run some automated checks to get a report and fix these. Now, the major problem comes when it is required as part of the design, right? So if designers can create a simplified markup, sure. If they cannot, then we have some options. One is we can use absolute positioning to position in the elements in a nested way visually, but in the markup they would still not be nested. Or the other way is to make sure that the functionality for keyboard and screen reader users is simple enough and exposed correctly, and we enhance the functionality for the visual users, because the designs are mostly catering to the visual users whenever they are nested, right? So like we will quickly look at some examples, and we'll quickly look at some of the solutions that could have solved this. So here you can see a card which is clickable as a whole, right? It takes you to a particular page if you click on the card as a whole, but then inside the card there is this three dot menu which is clickable once again, or which is interactive once again. So how do we build this behavior, right now? If you think about it from scratch, you'll probably end up creating a card component which will have a menu component as a child, right? Which means the card itself is interactive, and there is a nested menu component which again is interactive, which is not the correct pattern, right? So in here there are like some quick options. One is, since this menu visually also appears towards the end of the card, we can actually create it as a sibling of the card, right? So we can have a container which has this border. We can have a left side of the card which has this image, the text, these stats and everything, and then there is a right side of the card which has this three dot menu. The left hand side is individually clickable, the right hand side is individually clickable, which means that on the right hand side, if you click on anywhere apart from the three dot menu, that card wouldn't be clicked, right? But on the left hand side, wherever you click, the card would be clicked, right? So this will solve our nested interactivity problem and keep the behavior mostly same as what the designer expected, and like we wouldn't have any accessibility problems. Obviously this is like not a trivial thing to solve even in this case, because you need to change the markup a lot just to solve this smaller problem. But then like, yeah, since you have to solve this problem for screen readers and for other assistive tech, This is one way you can do things. Another one where we like interpret the design incorrectly, in those cases how do we solve it? So if you look at this design where there is a card and there is something which looks like a button which says got it, right? But the designer wants the whole card to be clickable, right? Not just the got it. They have placed the got it button so that the user gets to know that there is a CTA or this card is a call to action. But then since it is on mobile device, they wouldn't want to restrict the user interaction to just the got it, but the whole card. Anywhere on the card, if the user clicks, they should actually activate the functionality that is required. So in this case, as developers, what we would do is we'll already have a button component which exists as part of our component library or our reusable component. We'll have a card component. Again, we'll create a card component and put a button component inside it. Now the problem is the card is separately interactive, the button is separately interactive, although the button does not need to be interactive here, right? Because we know the got it thing does not need to be separately clickable. Anywhere on the card, if the user clicks, they are going to activate the functionality. So in this case, the proper solution is to not use the button element, but just use a div which looks like this button and does not have any interactivity, right? Because we don't need any interactivity on this button, right? So as developers, if we are using a component based framework, by default we'll tend to use the button. But then if we are slightly more aware, we'll get to know that this can actually be just made using a div with these classes, because it does not have to be interactive. It looks like a button, but semantically it is not a button. So in that case, this will actually solve our problem. Another quick thing which can solve some of these problems is absolute positioning. So if you have seen Zoom, I think this screenshot is from Zoom, where there is this stop video button where if you click on the button it will stop your video, but then there is also a menu on the right hand side where if you click you will see options related to your video. Now, again, in the UI, this looks like that the menu is actually nested inside the stop video button. But then, a good or easy way to solve these kind of things is they both of them can be siblings in the markup, and the menu can be absolutely positioned on top of the stop video button, right? So to the visual user, it still looks like it is something which is nested inside the button, but in the markup they are two separate things and they are just positioned in a way that they look nested. So markup wise we don't have any nested interactive elements, which means when the keyboard user or the screen reader tries to focus through it, they will first focus on stop video and then they move focus to the settings or the options menu. Now this one is like uh, slightly more advanced, where we actually need to make sure that we create the functionality, basic functionality for all, and then enhance it just for the screen reader users, right? So there is a like better example of this here. In this card you can see like these examples are obviously from some of our applications. So this is a small case card where the whole card is clickable. It will take you to the small case details page. There is a start investing button which again is clickable. There is a cross button which can also dismiss this card, right? So there are now three sections to this card, and the expectation is that if I click on these stats where it says 12.62%, it should actually like activate the whole card click, because the only things which do not activate the whole card click is clicking on start investing now or clicking on the cross button, right? So if you were like if you had to only solve it for the visual user, what you could have done is you could have created it in a nested way, and on click of this button you could have just either stopped propagation or just made sure that you figure out when this element is clicked the parent handler should not be clicked or should not be triggered. Same for this button, but that just like that does not really solve the problem for keyboard users as well as screen reader users, right? Because the screen reader, when they come to this component in the current screen reader setup, I think any of the screen reader would not actually tell them that there is a nested element here. And even if it tells them, it is not something that they can really understand, because when the focus in on the whole card, what would the screen reader read? Should it just read all weather investing, high volatility, build recession proof well, blah blah blah, and or should it also read all weather investing, blah blah blah, and start investing now, Kager, min amount, or should it also read the close button or not, right? So that is not something that screen readers can do right now. They do not have an algorithm for figuring out what to do with nested interactive elements in terms of announcements and in terms of focus also. Like some screen readers would actually just skip focus on the internal elements. Like you, when you're using a screen reader, if you press the next button or the tab button or whatever button you use for focusing in your screen reader setup, you will see that they actually skip the start investing now and the cross button altogether and go to the next one, right? To solve this Now all the things that we have seen till now, absolute positioning can work, but then like it will make the markup uh, very much ad hoc in a way, because now the absolute positioning needs to be for this button as well as this button, which is like now you'll have to mostly talk about how when the card gets smaller, how do you still position these elements when the card gets bigger on or like in other responsive kind of setups, where how do you position these elements. So the like to get rid of that generally, we would try to solve this in a way where we expose the same functionality for all the users, mouse users, keyboard users, screen reader users, and then we enhance the functionality just for the mouse user, which means that, like for example, the keyboard user does not need a focus on the whole card, right? For clicking the card, they can actually just have a keyboard focus on this title, and they can just like press enter to activate this, right? They do not really need to have focus on the whole card, right? So for a keyboard user, if you just assume that there are three elements which are focusable and there is no nested interaction, which is like one element is this title, one element is this button, one element is this cross button. Now all of these are siblings. There is no problem for keyboard user if we just had to create this for keyboard users. But since we have to create it for mouse users in a certain way, so we like the markup is still nested in some way. So we'll see how to solve that. Again, for screen reader users, we have already discussed it, right? So in this case, what should we do? I'll just quickly walk through a example, right? So what we would do is, for the keyboard users, we'll still like for all the users by default, we'll make this a link, make this a button, and make this a button, and the container does not have any role. Like it is not a div, it is not a button, it is not a link, right? It does not have any interactive roles by default. So all these three elements, they are now siblings. We don't have a problem with nested interactions. But now for mouse users, we can just add a extra on click on the container div without any role, right? Only for the mouse user. So which means that when the mouse user clicks on anything apart from all these three things which are siblings, which is not a problem, then we'll just like propagate that event to the parent div, and the parent div will just like do whatever clicking on this all weather investing would have done, which means it will just follow the link. And for the mouse user, the experience still remains the same, that they can click on anywhere on the card apart from these two places to actually uh, trigger the link. For the keyboard users, it remains a good experience that they have three tab stops which are siblings. They don't have a problem. For the screen reader users also, they have three tab stops because there is no nested interactive element. So for the screen reader user, how it would announce it, the first focus will be on all weather investing, which will say all weather investing button, click to activate, or like press enter to activate. Then the next focus would be on start investing now, again would be announced as button, like press space to activate. Then the next focus would be on cross again. So the problem with screen reader users where they did not understand what to announce, and in some cases they would not even announce the nested element, that gets solved by this. Now, like one major question here is, we are still adding a on click to the container div, right? Does it not make it a interactive element? So if you have used ESLint accessibility rules, they will complain that you are using a on click on a div without adding any keyboard functionality or without adding a role, right? Which is true for 90% of the cases, but in this particular case, we do not want this element to be exposed as an interactive element to either the keyboard or the screen reader. We only want to make sure that this div just has a on click for the mouse users, which is why we are not going to add any role here, which is why we are not going to add any keyboard functionality here, and which is how we are not going to violate the 4.1.2 thing which we saw, where if there is an interactive element that is supposed to behave the same for screen reader users and mouse users, it should be exposed in through an interactive role. So this click on the outside card, this does not need to be exposed to the screen reader user, right? Because whatever the screen reader user needs to do to activate this click is by just going to this all weather investing text, and they can just like trigger whatever mouse users can trigger by clicking anywhere else. So we are maintaining the same functionality for keyboard users, screen reader users, and mouse users, and we are enhancing the UI or the visual functionality for the mouse users by making sure that we don't violate any of the accessibility principles or any of the spec that we have. So there is no nested elements now. There is no nested HTML. There is no nested role. There is no interactive elements which are nested. But again, this again is not a trivial solution, and it requires a different solution for each case, right? So in this case, the card look like this, but then in your case, there can be some other different nested interaction for which you would need to figure out how to exactly have a solution for your specific use case. Like this is a more like something which solves this particular use case, but then it may or may not solve your use case. But the thought process remains the same. Make sure that you expose the same functionality for screen reader, keyboard, and mouse users in some way, and then enhance it for the particular visual user if it is required, right? Because generally the designs would be created keeping in mind the visual user. So any enhancement that needs to be done would only be for visual users. So then in those cases, just have this thought process that you can enhance the functionality for the visual user. Cool. I think this is mostly it. This was the most complex nested interaction that I've seen in like the designs that I work with till now. Obviously, the Twitter ones are slightly more complex, but then they also follow something similar in most cases. Uh, so in this case, another thing that we could have done is to just make sure that the designs are simplified and that there is no outside click required on the card, right? Instead of that, we just have three elements. But then that might have been too limiting for the designer, so we generally don't do that. Cool. I think this is the end of my presentation for nested interactive elements. There are a lot of references which I think are mentioned in the speaker notes in the slide. So people like Hayden Pickering, Adrian Rosalie, and Steve Faulkner, and all of these people are actually quite active with defining how to create nested interactive elements. You can follow them on Twitter. You can look at their blogs. They do have some more examples of how to create nested elements without compromising on accessibility. So if you are interested, you can go there. Yeah, again, apart from this, I work at Smallcase and we are hiring right now. In case any of you are interested, please feel free to reach out to me. These are my social handles. All of them are Gaurav5430. Should be easier to find. Cool. That is it. That's it for my talk. If there are any other questions, you can just ask me. I think I'll just quickly go through the comments to see if there are any questions. Ayush says that Twitter has excellent keyboard navigation, which is true. I think Twitter is one of the apps that I go to whenever I have some accessibility doubts as well. How do you go back after pressing tab? If you like, you press Shift tab, it will take you to the previous interactive element. Yeah, I think Saksham has already answered it. Sarang says for the menu to be absolute, it will be relative to the main card, again making it a child development. That does not need to be true, right? So the main card is the container. Then in the container there is a left content and a right content. The main container is not clickable. The left content is clickable. The right content is clickable. So it has to be child of the main card, but then the interactive elements are still siblings. The main card does not have a click, right? The left element has a separate click, which is equivalent to uh, what we initially had for the whole card. Instead of that, the only the left element would have that click functionality, and the right side would not have that click functionality, which means that if on the right side, if you click on anywhere else apart from the menu, it will not trigger the click on the container, right? So that is a small compromise that we would have, but then in terms of user expectation, I think it would still be fine, right? So I mean that is a uh, yeah, that is a small compromise that you'll have to do. Cool. Then I think uh, can you summarize once, right? So I think we'll quickly summarize it. You would face these issues whenever you are working with a component based framework and whenever you are working with a design team which has ambitions beyond the technology they use, which is I think valid. So in those cases you will get into situations where in the markup you end up creating nested interactive elements. Nested interactive elements is a problem for assistive technology users, especially people who use screen readers. uh, you can go through the uh, links on the slide where I talk about which spec says that it is incorrect, and what does the tooling say to understand more. But now we have established the problem that nested interactions are a problem. Now we'll just like figure out what the solutions are. There are two or three different solutions we discussed. One is in terms of positioning. We can just make sure that the markup is created in a way that it is not nested, because in some cases we actually misinterpret the design and create a wrong markup. Second is if the markup if visually they still need to be nested, then just use something like absolute positioning, but then that only works for simpler use cases. The next solution was to make sure that we somehow expose the same functionality for screen reader users, keyboard users, mouse users, and any other users, and then enhance it for a particular set of users that we want to, which again in most cases would be the visual users, which means that we'll only enhance it for the mouse users. And how do we enhance it? We can have any JavaScript tricks that we want. We can, like, when clicking on a child element, we can propagate the click to the parent element, or uh, like programmatically click on another element. So those kind of things we can do. How do you convey whether a card as a whole is clickable? Sometimes cards do not seem intuitively clickable, which is true. So I think I'll quickly show you as well somewhere. So like we have these interactions, right? So like when you hover over the card, you actually see that something changes. So which makes sure that it is clickable. And in this case, we actually highlight or like change the color of the link as well.
Gaurav, we can see only our slides.
Right, right. Let me just quickly change the link in the slides. Can you see it right now?
Yes.
Yeah. So I was just saying. Okay, let me show you at another place. Sorry. Yeah. So if you see this card, right? So we have this interaction for the visual users that they know that the whole card is clickable, right? They don't actually need to come to this text to see that it is clickable. Whenever they hover over the card, there is an interaction which definitely shows them that it is clickable. So if they click on it, they come here, right? Uh, Same for, I think, yeah, I mean, similar cards here. Let me just quickly show you how that would work. So this is the card, for example, right? So this whole card is clickable. There is an invest now button inside it. There's a like menu inside it. How do you know whole card is clickable? Because as soon as you hover, there is a border that appears around it, which shows you that okay, there is some interaction on the whole card, and then this pointer also appears, which says that this there is some interaction available on this card, right? When you hover over the button itself has a different depth on hover, which shows that the button is separately clickable. On this menu again, we show a background which shows that it is definitely interactive. So like this is more for a visual user. For the keyboard user, it does not really matter, and for the screen reader user, definitely it does not matter. But this is how we expose the or like convey whether something is clickable or not. Ripple effect on cards too, I think that is another way to do it. Cool. I think I've considered all the questions that are on the chat. Thank you so much for being patient listeners. If you have any other questions, please feel free to directly tag me on Twitter, or also like reach out personally. Over to you, Kiran.
Um, yeah. So if you have any questions, you can leave them in the comments. Maybe we will just wait for a minute or so. Awesome talk, Gaurav. Yeah,
Yeah,
very
I
in
hope
depth.
it was not too complex, because it actually like requires some prerequisite for of understanding something related to accessibility. But in case you have any feedback about the complexity of the talk, please provide that feedback so that I can improve this talk. Better to use basic HTMLs rather than Material UI for accessibility. So it depends. I think Material UI actually, like the React Material UI library, for example, has good accessibility built in. So I wouldn't definitely recommend building your own basic elements. But then for these nested interactions, right, they wouldn't have anything, because this is a pattern that you have to solve at a per use case basis. They would not have any elements which will tell you if you use this element, your nested interactions would be fine, right? They will give you buttons which are interactive, which are accessible. They'll give you the menu which is accessible. They'll give you links which are accessible. But how you compose them is completely on your side. But yeah, definitely better to use a framework which is battle tested for accessibility instead of creating your own. But for your personal projects, I would definitely suggest creating your own, because that is how you will get to learn more about why these things are accessible and how to make them more accessible. But production code basis, yes, uh, make feel free to go for a framework, because generally they are battle tested for accessibility. Material UI, specifically the React uh, Material UI library, is has a good accessibility in general.
Got it. Yeah, I think that's all for now, I guess. Yeah, if you have more questions, feel free to reach out to uh, Gaurav on Twitter. Yeah,
Cool. Thank you, guys.
yeah. Thanks, Gaurav. We will move on to our next talk. Hi, Tapan. Uh, can, uh, can you share your screen? Hi.
Cool. Sharing my screen. Okay, this will be about a robust routing pattern we generated using finite state machines, especially for A/B test. Little bit talking about me. I'm Tapan. I work as a software developer at FlyFin. It's a US-based product for freelancers, especially. It's like a taxing engine. So yeah, we'll move on. Routing in React apps, especially what we do, like we use React router or routing solution of Next.js, and then all the logic for the navigation, whether it's like be back or forward, lives inside the UI layer only, the screens or the components. And then if there are some logic involved going back or forward, it becomes messy or complex, having back or forward handling all the logic. And then if you want to add some screen in between the flow or remove the screen, or we want to logically navigate the user to some screen. So in that case, it needs refactoring, like taking that handler and adding one more logic for adding one more screen. So it becomes very much complex. And also for A/B tests, if you're using A/B tests with Firebase, it gives us that bucket ID. And depending on that particular bucket ID, there's a difference in the flow. So creating that tree kind of structure at runtime and then handling the whole logic. By logic, I mean there'll be different buckets, right? So it will be like for bucket A, go to this screen, or bucket B, go to this screen. So these are the basic problems we have in React apps. So talking about our flow, it's too much complex if you see. So basic, by the way, this is the Xstate that I'll be talking about it later. It's the visualizer it provides. So we just have to create this JSON here, and everything is visualize how the flow will work. There'll be two next buttons, and if I click here, then it will move forward, and then if I previous, then it will go back. So it works like that. So the solution for this is using finite state machines. What is a finite state machine? Let's Google it quickly. So, by the definition, it's a mathematical model, which is it's an abstract machine that can be exactly one of a finite number of states at a given time. So, a little example, if we check here, this is the locked state. If we push, it will go back and then it will unlock. So, or we can say like temperature, it can be hot or it can be cold. So, there'll be finite states and it will be one of the finite states at a particular time. So there's a good library called Xstate for React, which does all the heavy lifting for us. And there's a special this provides all the basic things like create machines and then for creating different configs. And there's a different library for React specially, which provides us hooks to like this use machine or create machine. This is from Xstate only, but use machine hook this Xstate React provides us. So, talking about Xstate Glossary, so there are states. States can be atomic, compound, or final. By atomic, I mean that state will be a streamlined single linear state. And then by compound, I mean there can be nested states inside a particular state. And by final, I mean there will be a node which will be final. After reaching the final state, all the actions will be just ignored. By action, I mean there are pure functions which we call. just like we dispatch actions in Redux, it's the same. We call the action, and state machine will do whatever is configured inside it. By guard, guards are basically functions which provides a boolean value, true or false. So for a particular screen, there can be multiple possible screens, and there'll be a logic whether to move to that particular screen or not. Guards provide us that. So yeah, let's move on to the next slide. So we'll be giving an example to migrate a normal React app using CRA to Xstate. So I've created this small flow, which includes one welcome screen, and then there's an onboarding question. So there's also a checkbox. If it is true, like it is checked, then the user will go to this screen. And if it is not, then user will go to question two and then move on to the screen. And then like this is a small example of our FlyFin app. It's like the user wants to connect the statements, or he can also share the statements over email. So if you want to connect your statements, you have to do sign up because it will require user authentication. And then directly you can connect your bank. So in sign up and this connect your bank logic, there can be two possible things. There can be an error or there can be a success. If it is success, then it will move to the other screen, and if on the connect bank logic success, it will move to this success screen. And then there's another screen which includes you will receive an email or reply with the necessary details. Then just click on the request email and it will go to success. So I've created this small project. It's bare minimum React project, and it contains these screens. All of the screens are here, and we'll be adding Xstate on this particular project. So I'll just quickly change the branch and walk through what I did, and then also run a yarn. So we have just added this system folder. It includes experiments. So this is the base experiment. Which is like it has an ID, which is example. There'll be an initial screen, which is home. By the way, all these screens to route map is here. So if you have this key home, it will be routing to the slash route. And then we have different screens configured here. And these are the handlers. I'm clicking on next, this is the next action. It will be going to onboarding question one. And in the same way, we have configured all of these here and also the previous one. Also, this is will be taking up in the next branch. So there are two targets for the screen. It can be onboarding question 1A or onboarding question 2. So as in Figma, there can be two possible targets. So let me just quickly change. Okay, also there are some hand this will be the file which will include all the guards. And then main thing is this machine subscriber. It will subscribe to the machine, and if there's any change, it will just take the user to router. It will just do router.push and then to the next screen. I'll be just quickly walking through how this is being done right now. So see, the whole logic is living here. I'm doing should so this is just a key. If it is checked, then it should be true. And if it's true, it will take the user to question 1A. And if not, simply to the question 2. But the main issue comes when there are more logics and maybe the A/B test comes in the picture. It will become pretty much complex. And also for the back handler. So right now, I'm just doing history.back. But what if I want to take the user somewhere else? Let's say I'm coming from 1A. I want to go to 1, not 1A. So for better explanation, I'll do that here. So let's say I'm on question 1, and I navigated to 1A and then to 2 from, so I missed this out here. Now I wanted to move back directly to question 1. So in this scenario, history.back will not work. We have to manually handle that logic here and take the user to the specific screen. So for that, these previous keys will help. So we'll uh, change the branch to a different one. So I've just in this branch I've just refactored in this way that I've added all the back handlers in the screen itself. So previously it was being handled from the main screen. It used to live here, the back handler, this one. So it's just the small thing. Okay, so how to change the whole thing? If I just move to the previous branch, and right now I'm on, let's say, the home screen. I'm doing router.push here. So I just have to use the machine subscriber, and it will give us two things, basically three things. The
Tapan, can you zoom
Yeah,
in the screen? We can't see the code.
okay, cool. Is it better now?
A little bit more.
Okay, how about now? I'll
Yes,
close
yes,
this one
it's
also.
good.
Cool.
It's good.
Cool. So this customer will just give us three things: the current level state, the current screen of the machine, and then there's this basically this is a function which takes in the params and other things, and this one is service. So we just want to use send here. Uh, so what you do, what we'll just restructure send from use machine subscriber, and then we'll just simply do send. And for the next like keys, I've just created this constant which includes everything. We just have to do next, and we don't have to actually use the router. And if I just show you, it's basically here. And now when I go next, it will take me to question 1. And so we'll just check out the branch where it is already configured everything. Okay. So now if you see these things are handled, and now if I go to the question 1, here's uh, these are the actions that we are sending to the machine. But one thing is not yet done, which is the payload. So we want to handle that logic, right? And we want to handle it by Xstate only. So we have to send the payload. So the payload can be this one should go to 1A or not, and then the machine will receive it in the target. So if I just quickly change the branch, we are sending the payload from here, should go to 1A or not, and then the condition. So this condition is, as I talked, it's a function which returns Boolean. So it receives the event. Event will contain the payload, and it will just returning. And if this condition is true, this target will be resolved. If not, the machine iteration will move to the next target. And since there's no condition here, it will move to this screen. You must have seen these new things have added. These are basically actions which run on each target. And this is basically setting the this key to the Xstate context. So it's also includes one context where we can save data and reuse later. So I've just manipulated the this key. It's now true if the checkbox is marked. And then in the back handlers, we can just so just like next, we have back handler also. which includes to target. And similarly, if this condition is true, then it will go to 1A. If not, it will go to the first question. So now how it works, we'll do a reload and then s- see if I click on this check mark, it will take the user to 1A. And if not, it will take the user to question A. So that's how it works. Now the question comes, how is it helping us in the A/B testing? So right now, adding and removing screens, it's pretty easy. I just have to take the config and simply I can just add one more screen. Let's say I'm adding this screen and I just map it to the next function and change it the next of this flow, and also similarly change the previous handler. And yeah, we just have to add the screen in the code and it's already configured. So it's that simple. So the thing is, adding this is a little bit painful if you are having a big code base. You have to check the whole flow, visualize it, and then create the configs, write the conditions, and also it's a bit hectic at once. But once it's up, it's very seamless to change. So we'll be talking about how we can simply add another config. So we'll just remove it. And then I can just simply add one more experiment. I can call it maybe experiment B. And then just I'll just copy this. And after that, we'll maybe change the initial route, maybe from home to onboarding question one. And I'll just get rid of this home. Uh, And then what I'll do, I'll just remove the backender, because since it's the initial screen, there will be no back button here. We'll change the name of the machine. Similarly here, and then I'll just go to the wrapper. So wrapper is basically which tells us which machine to use. So we can have it in a better way. We can just take the initial route of the current machine here. No. So we cannot we can write it in a better way. We cannot hard code this because it will depend. But yeah, we can. So here we can just change the machine. So if you're having this, okay. So wherever it is, the base experiment, we can simply change it. So here we have all the experiments. We have to maintain it like in order to know which all experiments we are having. And based on the bucket ID, which is Firebase is giving us, we can change the particular experiment. So right now we have this new experiment, which is experiment B. And then we in this file, which gives us machines based on keys, we can just add one more switch case, which is for this one, the experiment B, and then we can just import it. And now what we have to do, we have to change the current experiment. So right now, this use effect is setting the current experiment. So it's just mocking it. In real life, we'll be getting it from some API call or the Firebase config that this is being changed, and load another config based on this particular bucket ID. So we'll be, let's just change it. So this was for base experiment. We'll add it from base to experiment B. And then maybe let's make some more changes in order to feel like get the real feel how is it working. Maybe I want to give it a negation. If it is false, if it is false, then go to 1A. Otherwise, go to screen onboarding question 2. So let's see how it works. It might fail. Uh, okay, so the main screen will be this one. So whenever I reload, the initial screen will be one which is configured. And now if I'm checking it, so ideally it should go to the onboarding question two screen and it goes. So it means that it's working fine. But okay, I think yeah, that's the basic bare minimum configuration. There are some problems also. We'll quickly want to talk about them. If we are using Redux store, we are storing this key here in the context. In that way, there'll be two sources of truth. This condition will be stored here also and in the Redux store also. So in order to solve it, we can just use selectors and just get that key and send it every time here. And we don't have to use actions or context at all. But one thing is also there, if we don't want to have any logic in the screens, we just want to have UI. We cannot rely on these conditions being the logics being sent from the UI. So we can have pure JavaScript functions and we can just use it like should go to A or not, and then it will return that boolean and tell the machine to go to that particular screen or not. So yeah, I think that's mostly it. Let me know if are there any questions. We'll check out quickly.
Nice talk, Tapan. So if you have any questions, you can leave a comment. Uh,
So there's one question I want to make use of the app where he had the flow. Not sure
yeah.
what does it mean.
So
Okay, so
comment.
when we are popping from the history, so we are not basically popping from the history. We are not exactly making use of the history. So the history is also in the machine state, but we can use it if we want to go back in the history. We don't want to manually handle the back buttons. We can also use them, but we are not exactly using the browser's history. The machine itself contains the history, like the last key, and we can just move to that particular one.
Got it. So do we have the link for the demo code
Yeah,
somewhere?
sure. Where should I paste it?
You can put it in the private chat so that I'll share with the audience.
Sure, let me quickly do that.
So meanwhile, if you have any other questions, you can put it in the comments.
Yeah, I think I added this in the private chat.
Yes, I'll share.
So yeah, just you guys can ping me if there are any
Yes,
questions.
yes. So yeah, I think it's a lot of code. So audience
Yeah,
might want to take a look at the code once again.
uh,
So feel free to reach out to Tapan if you have some questions. You can reach out to Tapan. Uh, and yeah, I put the link in the comments so you can take a look at the code as well. Yeah, nice talk, Tapan.
cool. Thanks.
We have one question, I guess. Does this work with React A/B test as well?
Yeah, it does. It works with that also. So we also using React A/B test on the introduction. So we just get the cookie and set different conflicts according to the cookie.
Got it. Uh, yeah,
Cool. Okay. Thank you.
yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks, Tapan, for the nice talk. Yeah. So yeah, we'll move on to our next talk. Our next talk is by Pulkit. Um, Pulkit,
Hi everyone.
hi.
Hi.
Yeah.
So just
So yeah,
confirming
we'll get
my
started.
screen.
Yes.
Yeah, my
Yeah.
screen is visible, right?
It's visible. Yeah.
Hi. I'm Pulkit and I work as a UI engineer at Flipkart. And today I'll be talking about battle for privacy. So this battle is actually between the browser and the trackers, and how over the years, browsers have tried to restrict unauthorized trackers from tracking you and also keep a check on the authorized trackers as to what data they share. Now, in order to provide you a very good user experience, browsers have been sharing our data with advertisers, A/B testing frameworks, just to ensure that we have a very personalized experience. But over the years, browsers have worked out one or more ways to keep these trackers on our keep these advertisers, A/B testing frameworks, all of them on a very tight leash. And when I talk about browsers, uh, specifically Safari ITP and Firefox, they have been at the forefront when it comes to addressing the issue of privacy. So throughout the course of the presentation, I'll be talking about Safari ITP, Chrome same-site cookie policy, and Firefox enhanced tracking prevention system. But before jumping to Safari ITP and Chrome same-site cookie policy straight away, let's first understand what techniques these trackers use to actually track you. So the first and the foremost is third-party cookies. So it gives trackers an option to track users across multiple domains. So consider a scenario where you're on a domain, and let's assume that the domain has some A/B testing library. Okay. Now you make some interactions on the particular domain, and you click somewhere and you scroll. Now what happens is that A/B testing libraries, let's say it sends a post call, and in the response of the post call, it forms or it sets some cookie on its domain. Okay, the domain of the A/B testing library is different here. On its so it forms a cookie on its domain. Now let's say you go on a different domain, and by chance that domain also has the same A/B testing library. So now what is going to happen is when that A/B testing library makes any get request, makes any post request, all those cookies that it formed earlier would be sent along with that request. So you see, right, how you were on a different domain, but the same A/B testing library is able to track you across two completely different domains. Okay, so this is one way of tracking, and we'll talk about third party cookies more in detail. Another very prominent way of tracking is tracking pixel. So a tracking pixel is actually nothing but a transparent one by one pixel image tag, uh, which is used for tracking. So let's consider this example. Let's say where you're on a product page of an e-commerce website, and you're scrolling and you're spending some time. So what the e-commerce website owner can do is he can actually drop a social media tracking pixel there. So what the tracking pixel will do is when the browser makes a request to load that image, it will make a request. So what the social media tracker can do, they can form cookies, okay, and they can send your information in query params. Next thing you know, or let's say that you are on the product page, you spend some time but you don't end up buying it, but by that time tracking pixel call has been already made. It is an image tag. So now what happens is when you actually go to that social media website, you see the advertisement of that same product that you were looking at few minutes ago, and I'm sure this has happened to all of us at some point of time. So this is also one way of tracking pixel. Last but not the least is user agent. So your user agent can actually give a lot of information about you, such as your browser or what OS you are using, and the website owners can target you accordingly, according to your browser or your current OS version or whatever the user agent, whatever info the user agent provides. Just like I mentioned earlier, Safari and Firefox have been at the forefront when it comes to addressing the issue of privacy. So let's talk about Safari ITP. So ITP actually stands for Intelligent Tracking Prevention System. So it actually internally it has a machine learning classifier. Now that machine learning classifier is able to classify or label domains as cross-site trackers. So when this machine learning classifier or when intelligent tracking prevention system labels some domain as a cross-site tracker, which means it can track you across multiple domains. So it will label it as a cross-site tracker, and all the restrictions that come along with ITP, it will apply to all those trackers also. So now I won't be talking about every ITP version, but I'll be talking about the major ITP versions and the restrictions that came along. So Safari ITP 1.0 and 1.1. So I'll first read out the restrictions that came along. It says that third-party cookies may be used for 24 hours. Then it says they will be purged after 30 days. And the last thing is introduction of the storage access API. So first, before going ahead, let's understand how third-party cookies actually work. Now consider the scenario. Okay, you have this web page and you have this web page. Here the top level domain is a.com and there is an iframe here, okay, or an embed here which has a domain b.com. So now so this iframe, right, b.com, so whatever cookie this b.com sets or tries to access are set to be in third party context. Okay, and also for the browser, when we're talking about the browser, right, third party cookie is actually nothing. So for the browser, it is always the third party context, because if you see, right, the top level domain is a.com here and the iframe or the embed is b.com. So whenever b.com actually tries to set or access some cookies, it is set to be accessed or set in third party context simply because it does not match the top level domain. Top level domain here is different. Whereas consider the second scenario, consider the second web page. Now b.com. Now b.com is the top level domain here. So whatever cookie is sets or it tries to access, okay, those cookies would be in first party context because this is the top level domain. So this is what third party context means. Let's come back to the rules of ITP 1.0 or the restrictions. It says third party cookies may be used for 24 hours. So let's see what it means. Now consider this case. So again, the top level domain is a.com. So there is a social media, let's say, embed here whose domain is example.com. So now let's see, let's say that you click on this button. Okay, let's say you click on this button and this iframe or this embed tries to form a cookie. Now, just like I already mentioned, example.com does not match with the top level domain. So this is third party context. So it tries to form a cookie in third party context. So what the ITP rule here says is that, okay, so you formed a third party cookie or rather a cookie in third party context. But if you do not visit example.com in the first party context, which means example.com should be the top level domain. If you do not visit example.com as the top level domain in 24 hours after forming this cookie in this embed, then the cookies are going to be partitioned. So what it means is, let's say you formed a example.com, you clicked here, you clicked on this button, and this embed tries to form a cookie. Okay, but now you do not visit example.com as a top level domain for 3 days. So now what is going to happen, and which is the very important point here, the cookies are going to be partitioned. So before going ahead, let's now understand what does partitioning mean. Now consider this example. Again, the top level domain is a.com here. The iframe or embed has b.com. And on the other hand, it is the top level domain is c.com and the iframe is same. So now what will happen is, let's say b.com actually forms some cookie here. Forms a cookie here means it forms a cookie here when it is being used as an iframe, but the top level domain is a.com. Now partitioning means that the cookies that the embed forms here are directly tied to the top level domain here, a.com. So let's say it forms some cookies here. Okay, now you come to a different web page where the top level domain is b.com, but the embed is same, it is b.com. So whatever cookie it actually set here, okay, those cannot be accessed here simply because these cookies are partitioned. Okay, this is what partitioning means. They are tied to the top level domain also. So this is what partitioning means. If we come to our previous example, so it says that if you do not visit example.com as the top level domain for 24 hours after forming the cookie here, then all those cookies would be partitioned. Okay. Now, if I come to the rules again, it says they will be purged after 30 days. So now let's assume that you clicked there and you did not visit example.com for 3 days. But if you do not visit, but what Safari ITP says is, if you do not visit example.com for 30 days, then what is going to happen is it is going to purge. It is going to purge all the example.com cookies. They cannot even be used for first party use. Only and only when you interact with example.com as a first like the top level domain, then only will it start forming cookies. Otherwise, all cookies will be purged and will be, it will continue to purge those cookies. But now there is actually a slight problem here, because if you see, right, this embed, okay, just like we assume, like example.com forms a cookie when you click here. But if you do not visit it in 24 hours, then it partitions the cookie, which means it is tied to a.com. Now let's also assume you end up opening example.com as the top level domain and it forms some cookies there. But since the cookies that you formed in this iframe are tied to this, okay, this is a different partition. And when you open example.com as a top level domain, that is a different partition. So this actually, created a problem for single sign-ons and everything. So Safari ITP 1.1 introduced storage access API. So through the storage access API, what these trackers, or let's say what these social media embeds could do is they could access at least their unpartitioned cookies. Unpartitioned cookies, as in example.com is opened as a top level domain. Okay, and then you can access it using the storage access API. And we'll talk about storage access API more detail in the coming slides. Now let's come to Safari 2.0. So we just learned that Safari 1.0 and 1.1, they had the 24-hour grace period, which means that if you interact with the embed, or if you interact with the cross-site tracker as a first party, as a top level domain, then you can then partitioning would take place. But Safari 2.0, it completely removed the 24-hour grace period. So and it also says immediate cookie partitioning. So what does that mean? So now let's say this is another web page where the top level domain is news.example. Okay, and now there is a video embed which has the domain is as video.example. So now what is going to happen is, since the 24-hour grace period is removed, completely discarded, so cookies will be partitioned immediately. Cookies would be partitioned immediately, and the embeds would have to use storage access API to access those cookies. So now what will happen is, let's say this video embed, you click on this button and it tries to access its cookies, partition cookies, non-partition cookies. So what would happen is, so Safari will actually give you this pop-up saying that do you want to allow video.example to use cookies and website data while browsing news.example. So if you click on allow here, right, then Safari ITP would know that, okay, you've given it consent. Now this example, this video.example would be able to access its non-partition cookies. Okay. And obviously the cookies that this embed forms here are tied to the news.example, but I'm talking about the non-partition cookies here. Obviously the cookies formed here are tied to news.example. So using the storage access API, the video embed would be able to access its first party cookies. Okay, but now what actually is the difference? Because just like we saw, this storage access API, which gives you this pop-up, was actually also introduced in 1.1. So the change here is with 2.0, what happened was this pop-up will come up. Okay, in 1.1 it would silently ignore. So what it means is, let's say if the embed uses the storage access API in 1.1, then it would silently ignore this pop-up, okay, if it follows certain rules. But with 2.0, you will explicitly have to click on allow here. Otherwise, this embed would not be able to use its non-partition cookies. Okay, so these were the restrictions that came along with the ITP 2.0. Now let's come to Safari ITP 2.1. So it says partition cookies are no longer supported, and third parties classified with cross-site tracking capabilities to use storage access API. And a very important point is client-side cookies to have a mandatory 7-day expiry or a 7-day cap. So I'll start with the second point first. So there are actually two ways of forming a cookie. One is either you send those cookies in the HTTP or HTTPS response, or your request response. Then the other way is document.cookie, which is the JavaScript way of forming the cookies, or it is also called as the client-side cookies. So all those cookies which are formed through document.cookie, Safari 2.1 says that all those cookies will have a mandatory 7-day expiry. So even if you set the expiry as 10 years, it does not matter, because it will automatically be kept to, capped to 7 days. And the reason for it is, so a lot of advertisers or trackers actually form first party cookies. So let's say an advertiser is being loaded on a domain, so it will actually form cookie on that particular top level domain. Okay, and later when you refresh and you visit it later, it will use the first party cookies. So to restrict that, Safari 2.1, it brought in a 7-day expiry, and partitioning is no longer supported. Now there are no partition cookies. So for every cookie, whether it is a third party cookie that was formed in the partition, which was formed rather when you are using a domain as an embed, or is it a first party cookie when you are opening the particular domain on the top level, every cookie will have to be accessed using the storage access API. So the partition cookie concept that they introduced, it was like completely discarded. Now Firefox enhanced tracking prevention system. So unlike ITP, Firefox enhanced tracking prevention system, it actually uses a list called disconnect lists. Okay, so if your domain is present in the disconnect list, then you will be considered as a tracker. And disconnect list, right, this also works on the same ideology, that if your domain has cross-site tracking capabilities, then you will be labeled as a tracker, and all the restrictions that come along with enhanced tracking prevention system, they'll apply to that. And also Safari says, that Also, a lot of times you might see this pop over when you open some websites on Firefox, which will say if the site, and it will also say that if the site seems broken, try turning off enhanced tracking prevention system, because by default it will block all the social media trackers, all the third-party cookies. So you might see this pop up a lot of times on Firefox. Now let's come to Chrome's same-site cookie policy. So just like I mentioned, right, Safari and Firefox, they have been very proactive, but following their footsteps, back in 2020 or in 2021, Chrome decided to roll out same-site cookie policy. So what it says is, from Chrome 80 onwards, site owners need to explicitly label third-party cookies with same-site none and secure in order to use them on other sites. If the attribute is absent, then the cookies will automatically be labeled as same-site lex. So let's first understand what these attributes actually mean. Same site strict. Okay, so this is now the most stringent attribute. So this simply says that your cookies cannot be accessed in third-party context. It also says that cookies will only be available in first-party context, which means whether if you're trying to use your cookies or set or get your cookies in the iframe, right? If you're trying to access them in the iframe in third-party context, they won't be accessible. It simply says that. Next, let's come to same site is equal to lex. So it says that third-party cookies will be sent only during top-level navigation. So before I mentioned, right, if you try to set or access cookies in an embed or in an iframe, and if the top-level domain is different from the iframe domain, then those cookies are said to be accessed or set in third-party context. But there is actually another way to set or access cookies in third-party context, which is, let's say you're on a domain, and that domain again loads let's say an A/B testing library with a different domain. That library has a different domain, so it sends a post call. Okay, so for that domain, okay, when it sends the post call, then all the cookies associated with that A/B testing library's domain would also go. Now these cookies, since the domain of the A/B testing library and the top level domain do not match, these cookies that go along with the request are also in third-party context because they don't match with the top level domain. So this is another example of third-party context, or accessing cookies in third-party context rather. Now, it says that third-party cookies will be sent only during top-level navigation. So what it means is, let's say you have this domain a.com, okay, this top-level domain. There is an anchor tag here. So when you click on it, it sends a GET request to example.com. Now, since this is top-level navigation, so what will happen is all the cookies of this domain, example.com, would go along with that request. Okay, because the same site attribute is lex here. If the same site attribute was strict here, considering that the same site attribute was strict here, then the cookies won't be sent. And since the attribute set here is same site lex, and this is top level navigation, so cookies for example.com would be sent along with that request. And this is third party context. And the highlight here is Chrome says that if you do not set this attribute on your cookies, same site, then by default Chrome is going to assume that, okay, the same site is equal to lex. Now let's come to same site none and secure. So cookies are accessible in third-party context over a secure connection here, and it means that if you want to access your cookies in third-party context, not top-level navigation or anything, just generally in third-party context, then Chrome same-site cookie policy says that you need to provide these two attributes: same site is equal to none and secure. So why Chrome says secure? Because this attribute actually ensures that you are accessing cookie over HTTPS. Okay, so if you actually form a cookie with same site none and secure on a domain, let's say with HTTPS, and then on the same version of the domain, same HTTP version of that domain, if you try to access that cookie would not be accessible. Okay, because the attribute set here is secure, and this is like the most relaxed attribute. Okay, because if you set your cookies with same site none and secure, then you would be able to access your cookies in any third-party context, be it in embeds, or while sending a request, while sending a post request or get request, anything. Yeah. So we talked about Chrome's same-site cookie policy, ITP. So the thing to notice here is that all of these things are, they're moving away from third-party cookies, or using storage, in fact, as a broader term, using storage to track users. So they're actually moving away from that. So Chrome actually introduced something called as Fledge, and this is still a proposal. Okay, this is a privacy sandbox proposal to serve remarketing and custom audience use case. So privacy sandbox, these proposals are generally, targeted to stop the use of storage, or let's say the cookies or first party cookies for targeting. Okay, so and going forward, tracking is going to look like this. Okay, Fledge, or there is something called as Flock also, which is still a theoretical concept, but Google Chrome is working on it. So I'll quickly give you an overview of what Fledge is going to do. So what Fledge is going to do is, let's say, so it has like 4 steps. So let's say you visit an e-commerce website with a product page, okay, and that product page has some bike, okay. So but you spend time on the page, but you do not end up buying it. So now the website owner actually has a purpose. So the website owner can actually see that you have a purpose here. Since you spend so much time on the product page, he can actually use you for remarketing. So what Fledge says is, so you need to add that user to an interest group. So let's say the website owner will create an interest group called bikes, and he'll add you there. Now comes the next step, running an ad auction. So let's say you visited the product website, you did not buy anything, and the website owner added you to an interest group. Now what will happen is, now let's say you go on a website that publishes ad, okay, and assuming that that website publishes ad, and behind the scenes it uses Fledge API. So what it is going to do is, it is going to run an auction. That auction is going to run to choose the best ad for you. Now it is going to run that auction. It is going to take out all the interest groups and run an auction on all the interest groups. Now what is going to happen is, it is going to send the data to the seller and the buyer. Now what does seller and buyer mean when we are talking about Fledge? So in the world of Fledge, seller means the publisher. Publisher as in the website you visit, which is actually showing you an advertisement. Buyer is actually the e-commerce website here in our example. So it will send real-time data to both the publisher and the buyer. Why? Because they might be running some demand side service, buyer might be running some demand side service here, which might check for your creatives, or it might check for whether there is enough budget in your campaign to run that advertisement or not. So it sends real-time data. Now when all of the ad is for you, then it displays the winning ad. Although this concept is a proposal, but this shows us that these browsers are actually moving away, or especially Chrome is moving away from targeting a specific user. Rather, they are saying that, okay, we'll put you in a bucket, and we'll target a cohort. We'll target an audience that shares similar interests. So yeah, so this is what the future of tracking might look like in the coming days, with Fledge coming in, and also Flock, which is which is still theoretical. So this is what the future might look like, future of tracking. So thank you. That was my time, and would be happy to connect. Over to you, Kiran.
Nice talk, Pulkit.
Thank you.
Yeah, there are so much nonce with the cookies. Yeah, thanks
There
for
is.
taking us through. Yeah.
Thank you.
So if you have any questions, you can ask them. This is how Facebook collects all the data
Ah,
from different.
not
Yeah,
only Facebook, a lot of A/B testing
yeah,
frameworks
yeah,
also.
yeah. Yeah, we wonder because we never visit Facebook or anything, but yeah, still our data goes there because we use their social share or social login, right, on our websites.
Correct, correct.
Yeah.
But there are some cases which are legitimate. Let's say single sign-ons.
Yes, yes, yes.
Would it be still possible to identify someone by taking an intersection of the interest groups? So according to what I've read about Flock, which stands for Federated Learning of Cohorts, and Fledge that I mentioned, so Chrome is going to put you in groups. So I don't think it should be. I mean, if they can identify you by the intersection, I think it defeats the purpose. So should not be. It should not be able to identify users. I think then it defeats the purpose, because they are going away from targeting a particular user. Rather, they are looking at targeting the cohort. So they shouldn't be able to. Although these things are still in works. So how do they incorporate Fledge? So actually, if you go on developer.google.chrome.com, so they've actually listed down a list of APIs. So if you want to incorporate Fledge, right, you will have to use the Navigator API. So Navigator API will have some functions, let's say get, run, auction, and all of that. So through that, you use the API, both the seller and the buyer, both the publisher and the website that is going to run the ad, both of them.
Uh,
I hope that.
so I'm not sure what he meant. Do, the, Kashyap, do you want him to summarize about A/B testing now, or are you asking him to give another talk? Yeah, I think you also mentioned a bit about the A/B testing also, right? In the beginning.
Because that is
Uh,
because I've worked in a in a framework which performs A/B testing.
yeah, I think this tracking especially happens uh, when certain scripts are embedded across multiple sites, right? Yeah,
Correct, correct. And the example that I mentioned, right? So if the A/B testing, let's say, library domain, it has the capability to, it can form cookies, right, through requests. So it can actually track
yeah,
you across multiple domains.
yeah.
But given the checks in place on Safari, ITP, and Chrome, it's not that easy right now.
So are there any tools in the sense, for example, let's say we are building or we are using, uh, uh, I think he's asking to just summarize. Uh, so I'm curious, like, let's say we are building some website and I want to
Hmm.
use some third party embed. Um, is there any tools we can use to test what kind of things they are doing in general to protect ourselves and our users?
Uh, Not, I'm not sure actually, but not test, but if you like open that in Safari directly, just like I talked about the Access API, right? So if that particular embed is actually trying to do if it's actually trying to use its first party cookie for the purpose of tracking, then it will definitely show you the storage, the Access API pop up. So this is one way to know whether that embed is trying to track you across multiple domains or not. But as far
Got
as the tool is concerned, I'm not really sure.
got it, got it. Uh, so, any specific questions?
There is one which is summarize A/B testing, I think.
Yeah, yeah. I think he clarified the previous question, like this one. He just want to summarize. But I think you already mentioned in the earlier of the talk. Yeah,
If I have to define it, a tool and like A/B testing means that you show two different versions of the website, two different users. Okay, and then you choose which version is winning. So let's say if you have e-commerce website, you will have two different versions, and then you will see which version gives you more conversions. So this is in
got it,
a like on a very high, on a high level. This is A/B testing.
got it. Yeah, I think that's all the questions we have, I guess. Yeah, feel free to reach out to Pulkit on Twitter if you have any questions. I think we have the links in the description. Um, yeah, nice talk, Pulkit. Even though we have some troubles in the beginning, glad you could make it. Really nice talk.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks to the to the IT guys here who fixed it for me, and that too at the
Yeah, great.
last moment.
Nice moment. Yeah, glad it worked
Thank
out.
you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, nice
happy,
talk.
yeah, happy that you booked out. Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Bye. So yeah, I think that's all the talks we have. I think all the three talks today were really amazing. A lot of informative. Uh, yeah, we'll try to publish the individual videos also soon. Maybe you can try to go over them again. Uh, yeah, looking forward to our next events. Um, Most probably we may or may not have a meetup next month because the conference is coming up in June. Yeah, I think a conference is going to be really good. If you haven't checked it out yet, uh, let me quickly share my screen. Yeah, so we have conference coming up on June 8th and 9th. We ran the CFP for the last 1.5 month, and we closed the CFPs as well. I think we got good number of top proposals as well, and we'll be finalizing the schedule for the conference in couple of weeks. and announce that as well. Yeah, looking forward to the conference. If we'll share the details about how to register for the conference in the coming weeks. So stay tuned for that announcements as well. Yeah, so that's all we have for now. We'll see you again in our next events. Bye. See you all again.